Welcome to the Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I'm so glad you've joined us for today's mystery. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening or watching from. We'd love to hear from our fellow mystery lovers around the world. Miss Marple and the Shadow over St. Mary Mead. Chapter 1. The Man from Nowhere. It was on the second Tuesday of October, just as the first real chill of autumn settled over the village of St. Mary Mead, that Mr. Renfield arrived. The morning had begun as usual. Miss Marple, seated comfortably by her parlour window, was stitching the last row of a lace border for a christening gown. She had paused to take a sip of her tea, lukewarm by now, when she noticed a stranger stepping out of the 11:20 from Paddington, a dark brown suitcase in hand, his overcoat sharply pressed, and his hat too new for someone truly local. Her view of the high street was partial, framed neatly by hydrangeas, but sufficient to take in newcomers. And this one stood out. There was a stiffness in his bearing too exact to be accidental. He walked as though he were counting each step. "Not a holiday maker," Miss Marple murmured, half to herself. "Not with a face like that." She had seen such faces before, nervous under control, eyes just too quick, polite in a way that implied distance, not warmth, a man who played a part. And in Miss Marple's long experience, men who played parts often had secrets worth discovering. By lunchtime, the stranger had taken a room at the Thatcher's Arms and introduced himself as Mr. James Renfield, a writer of travel essays, supposedly gathering material for a book on the unnoticed charm of rural England. It was at the grocer's that afternoon that Miss Marple made his acquaintance, deliberately, of course. "Oh, excuse me," she said gently, as he reached for a tin of sardines she had been eyeing. "You go ahead, young man. I'm terribly slow at these things." He turned quickly, then softened. "Not at all, madam. Please." He had a crisp accent, well-bred, but somewhere under it, something odd. Miss Marple filed it away. People's voices often said what their words did not. "Mr. Renfield, is it?" she said, feigning polite interest as she reached for her own tin. "I hear you're visiting from town. We don't often get many travel writers, though I dare say we have our charms." He smiled, a touch too practiced. "Indeed, there's something deeply peaceful about this village." "Yes," Miss Marple replied with a twinkle in her eye, "though peace, in my experience, is often a matter of perspective." He blinked at her, then chuckled. "I shall quote you on that. By evening, the village was buzzing." "Did you see the new gentleman?" asked Mrs. Goodbody at the post office. "Looks like he came out of one of those spy novels. Don't trust a man whose shoes are that clean." Miss Hartnell claimed she'd seen him taking notes in the churchyard. "Sketching tombstones," she whispered, "and he didn't even speak to the vicar." "I suppose he might be writing a book," ventured young Alice Brent, who delivered the milk. "But why here?" "Exactly," said Miss Marple, her voice mild, but her thoughts sharply focused. That night she sat by her fire, the lacework set aside. Her mind was busy. She thought of the war, not the last one, but the one before that. How polite men had visited quiet places, always with a cover story, wireless engineers, inspectors, even bird watchers. But she remembered how one of them, in a village in Dorset, turned out to be nothing of the sort. And now here was Mr. Renfield, too careful, too clean, too observant. Over the next few days he settled in with deceptive ease. He walked each morning after breakfast, notebook in hand. He dined at the inn without alcohol. He was courteous to all but familiar with none. He did not attend Sunday service, though the church bells tolled as usual. Miss Marple took particular note of how he avoided questions. When asked about his last book, he smiled vaguely and mentioned a volume on Northumberland coastlines. When asked if he had family, he said, Only distant cousins. All abroad. It was on Friday morning, while pruning her rose bushes, that Miss Marple received a visit from her dear friend, Mrs. Ethel Taylor. "Jane," Ethel said, leaning in confidentially, "have you noticed anything odd about our Mr. Renfield?" "I suppose you mean besides the fact he's an excellent liar?" Ethel nearly dropped her handbag. "You think he's lying?" Miss Marple nodded, adjusting her gloves. "Oh yes, he's not a writer at all. He has the wrong sort of curiosity." Ethel, though used to Jane's quiet brilliance, still looked astonished. "Then what do you think he is?" Miss Marple's reply was simple. "I think he's here for someone, or something. The question is whether he's come to protect it, or destroy it." That very evening, as twilight cast long shadows over St. Mary Mead, Mr. Renfield could be seen walking slowly past the late Nurse Burnhope's old cottage, the one with the blue shutters, now empty and overgrown. He paused at the gate, jotted something in his notebook, then turned back toward the inn. Miss Marple, watching from her parlour, put down her knitting, rose quietly, and went to prepare a pot of cocoa. Something told her St. Mary Mead was about to have its peace, ever so slightly disturbed. A gentle clink of the spoon, the only sound in the otherwise still parlour. Outside, the lamplight on the lane flickered faintly against the mist, curling up from the hedgerows. It was a quiet evening by all accounts, but Miss Marple had lived long enough to know that in St. Mary Mead, quiet often came before a storm. She sipped, then set the cup aside. Mr. Renfield's appearance outside Nurse Burnhope's cottage, deliberate, measured, and with that notebook again, had troubled her more than she let on to Ethel. Nurse Burnhope had died peacefully in her sleep some 3 months prior, but she'd been no ordinary nurse. During the war, she had served in field hospitals, and rumour had it, had once been stationed at Bletchley Park, though she never spoke of it. And now Mr. Renfield was circling her empty cottage like a cat round a cream jug. The following morning dawned bright and dry, a small mercy for the vicar's wife, Mrs. Weatherby, who was hosting the annual garden party for the parish charity fund. The whole village was abuzz, with tables to be set, jam jars to be judged, and cakes to be arranged in tidy rows. Children practiced their skipping, and the brass band from Much Benham tuned their instruments with blaring confidence. By 2:30, the vicarage lawn was alive with chatter and the rustle of bunting. Miss Marple arrived on time, dressed in lavender, with her brooch shaped like a dove. She greeted the guests warmly, but took a quiet seat under the cherry tree, her knitting bag beside her, and her eyes discreetly scanning the crowd. Mr. Renfield, as expected, made an appearance. He was dressed impeccably, as always, in a light tweed suit with a silk handkerchief tucked just so in his breast pocket. He made polite conversation with the vicar, then offered compliments on the jam selection. Yet his eyes moved constantly, always watching, always assessing, and once again he had that blasted notebook. "Still writing about rural charm?" Miss Marple asked, joining him at the lemonade table. He gave a brief smile. "Today's subject is community gatherings. There's something quite timeless about them." "Oh yes," Miss Marple replied, her voice mild. "And timeless things tend to endure long after people stop noticing them, like secrets." Mr. Renfield glanced at her, the smile faltering just slightly, before he bowed his head in mock courtesy. "Touché, Miss Marple." Across the lawn, a group of children squealed with laughter as the skipping contest began. Mrs. Weatherby clapped her hands, calling for a moment of silence before announcing the winner of the sponge cake competition. It was precisely at that moment, amid the applause, that a sharp, unmistakable bang rang out from the direction of the orchard behind the vicarage. For a breathless second, time froze. The clapping stopped. Birds burst from the hedges. Then came a woman's scream, raw, piercing, and horribly real. Miss Marple was on her feet before the echo had faded. Several villagers ran toward the orchard. Mr. Renfield moved with unhurried pace, his eyes narrowed and notebook forgotten on a bench. Miss Marple followed closely, her footsteps quick and steady. They reached the edge of the orchard to find a small crowd gathered in a semicircle. At the centre, face down among the grass and fallen apples, lay Mrs. Eliza Burnhope. For a moment, no one spoke. "Is she?" someone whispered. Miss Marple bent down slowly. There was no pulse, no movement. A spreading red stain bloomed across the back of Eliza's coat. A pistol, old-fashioned but functional, lay a few feet away near the gnarled trunk of a tree. "Good heavens!" breathed Mrs. Weatherby, who had arrived, hand to her throat. "It's Eliza!" Miss Marple looked up sharply. "Fetch the police, quickly!" Mr. Renfield crouched nearby, gazing at the body with disturbing calm. He reached for the pistol, but Miss Marple's voice cracked like a whip. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you." He froze, then smiled faintly. "Force of habit?" Miss Marple said nothing, but her eyes did not leave him. Within the hour, Inspector Craddock had arrived from the county station, a solid, dependable man with a fondness for Miss Marple's mind and a weariness for village tragedies. He wasted no time. "Murder weapons are .32 caliber, he muttered after examining the scene. "Fired once. No sign of struggle. No witnesses." "None that I know of," Miss Marple replied, then added softly, "But I don't believe Mrs. Burnhope was the sort to stroll through an orchard in the middle of a garden party." "She lived alone?" Craddock asked. "Yes, at the edge of the village, and she kept to herself since the summer." Craddock sighed. "We'll need to speak with everyone who was at the party, especially this fellow." He nodded toward Mr. Renfield, who stood at a distance, arms folded. Miss Marple leaned closer. "He calls himself a travel writer, but he's not. He's something else. And I think Eliza may have known exactly what." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You think she was the target?" "I think," said Miss Marple quietly, "that something followed Mr. Renfield here, and Eliza Burnhope saw what it was." Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed, and the lawn lay quiet again under a darkening sky, Miss Marple lingered beneath the cherry tree. A light breeze stirred the bunting. From her handbag, she drew out a folded envelope. A torn piece she had found tucked inside Eliza's sleeve when she leaned in earlier. She opened it under the fading light. It was a fragment of a larger page, but 3 words were clearly legible. Saint. Michael, package, November. Rain. She frowned. It wasn't local, it wasn't logical, but it was something meant to be found, or hidden. And either way, it meant that Eliza Burnhope had died for more than cake and conversation. Chapter 3. A Curious Past. The scrap of paper trembled slightly between Miss Marple's fingers as the breeze picked up and dusk deepened. St. Michael, package, November rain. Strange words out of place in a garden party setting, and yet she knew instinctively they were no accident. Eliza Burnhope had worn them like a secret on her sleeve. Quite literally. Miss Marple folded the paper with great care and tucked it back into her handbag. Behind her, the last of the chairs were being packed away by young Peter from the grocer's, whistling softly, and unaware that only hours earlier, blood had soaked the very grass he now trod. She took her time walking home. The lanes of St. Mary Mead were quiet now. Too quiet. No clinking of teacups, no raised voices, not even the sound of the vicar's dog barking at the post. It was the kind of silence that sinks into things. Miss Marple lit her parlour fire and prepared a fresh cup of tea, though her mind was far from the comfort of routine. Her knitting sat abandoned in its basket, and her eyes remained fixed on the small sheet of paper laid on the tea tray. St. Michael could be a church, of course, but it wasn't local. There was no saint. Michael's in the county, and Miss Marple knew every steeple within 3 parishes. It might also refer to the archangel himself, a symbol perhaps, or a code name. Package, something physical, perhaps a parcel, perhaps a person, something that needed to be found or kept hidden. And November rain, a time, a signal, it was too specific to be poetic. Eliza had clearly been carrying more than jam-making recipes in her mind. The next morning, Miss Marple set out early, a knitted shawl over her shoulders and a clear goal in mind, Eliza Burnhope's past. The cottage stood at the end of a gravel path bordered by rose hips and tired hydrangeas. Though shuttered and silent now, it still bore signs of a careful occupant, neatly trimmed ivy, a polished brass knocker, and not a weed in sight. The constable on duty, a fresh-faced lad named Hughes, straightened when Miss Marple approached. "Good morning," she said kindly. "I thought I might leave some flowers on the step. Eliza and I were friendly." He nodded with a touch of embarrassment. "Course, miss, but don't go touching anything." "Wouldn't dream of it," she smiled, placing the small bouquet down. "Tell me, has anyone come asking about her things? Family? Friends?" "Not yet. No family to speak of. Lived on her own for years," the inspector said. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Yes, but she wasn't always quite so alone. Later that day, she called on an old acquaintance, Mrs. Edith Carrington, who had worked alongside Eliza during the war years and now lived in Much Benham. Over seed cake and sherry, Miss Marple steered the conversation with subtle precision. "Eliza was a private soul," Edith said, dabbing at her lips, "but brilliant, unshakable in a crisis. Do you know, during the air raids, she once stitched a man's abdomen by candlelight in an underground shelter, never a tremble in her hand." "She never spoke of her past here," Miss Marple noted. "No war stories, no anecdotes." Edith gave a soft laugh. "That sounds like Eliza. She was posted to Bletchley, you know, classified work. Signals, decoding, intercepts, the sort of thing that doesn't make for friendly chit-chat at church bake sales." Miss Marple's teacup paused mid-air. "She worked in code breaking." "Oh yes, that's where she met Captain Avery. They were close." "Captain Avery?" "Leonard Avery, intelligence officer, vanished in 46. Rumor was he was killed during an operation gone wrong in Vienna, but you didn't hear that from me." Miss Marple inclined her head gently. "And the rumor came from?" "A letter Eliza received. She never said it directly, but she kept it in a locked drawer. Some said she blamed herself. She left the service soon after and moved here." So, Miss Marple thought, Eliza had known secrets once, and secrets had known her. She thanked Mrs. Carrington and returned to St. Mary Mead with purpose in her step. At the village library, she consulted old directories and war records. Sure enough, Captain Leonard Avery's name appeared briefly in a 1944 roster attached to the Ministry of Information, but after 1946, nothing. Vanished. And beneath the newspaper archives, she found an article. "Mysterious fire at Intelligence Depot, November 9th, 1946, suspected sabotage. Several personnel missing. One presumed dead. November, rain, a package, the language of spies." That afternoon, she paid a quiet visit to Inspector Craddock, who was reviewing statements in the vicar's study. "Come to help solve another murder, Miss Marple?" he asked, with a tired smile. "I believe," she said gently, "that Mrs. Burnhope's death was not only a murder, but a message." Craddock sat straighter. "Go on." "She wasn't just a nurse, Inspector. She was a code breaker, and she was connected to a man who disappeared after the war, Captain Avery." "Never heard of him." Precisely, he was erased, like the truth. And I think Eliza Burnhope discovered something, perhaps something long buried, something someone didn't want found. Craddock rubbed his chin. That still leaves us with Mr. Renfield. Yes, said Miss Marple, and I believe he's at the very heart of this. Eliza was watching him. I saw it at the garden party. She feared him, but not in a way you fear a stranger. She feared what he represented. Craddock frowned. You think he's a spy? I think he's something far more dangerous, a man trained to disappear in plain sight, a man sent to clean up an old mess. Craddock let out a slow breath. I'll speak to the Home Office, quietly, but we'll need more than instincts. Miss Marple opened her handbag and handed him the folded scrap. He read it aloud. St. Michael, package, November rain. You believe this is a code? He asked. I believe, she replied. This is the final breadcrumb from a woman who died protecting the truth. As evening fell, Miss Marple walked home past the vicarage gate. A drizzle had begun to fall. Fitting, she thought. The village was slipping into silence again, but this silence no longer felt innocent. It felt watchful. Behind curtains and hedges the spy still waited, but so did Miss Marple. Chapter 4. Threads of a Lie. The drizzle had thickened into a fine mist by the time Miss Marple reached her gate. Her shawl clung damply to her shoulders, and her umbrella dripped a steady rhythm onto the cobbles. But she hardly noticed. Her mind was still fixed on the name Leonard Avery, a man erased from history, and the paper scrap that had survived Eliza Burnhope's final hour. She knew something more was coming. Inside her warm sitting room, the fire crackled, and the familiar scent of lavender polish hung in the air. Yet even here, in the heart of her comfort, she felt the threads of deception stretching tight around St. Mary Mead. Someone had pulled them taut, and someone else was about to be caught in the tangle. The next morning the sun returned, and the village pretended to be itself again. At the greengrocer's, Mrs. Moss rambled on about marrows. At the post office, Mr. Perkins joked about the price of stamps. The murder was already being folded into polite whispers. Poor Eliza, such a quiet thing. Wrong place, wrong time. But Miss Marple had never believed in such coincidences, and neither, she suspected, did Mr. Renfield. She saw him later that day, leaning against the iron railing outside the churchyard, his eyes fixed not on the graves, but on the vicarage windows across the green. He didn't notice her at first, but when he did, he straightened, tipping his hat as if nothing at all were amiss. Miss Marple, he said pleasantly, I do hope the party wasn't spoiled by recent excitement. Oh, I find excitement quite relative, she replied. In fact, I've been thinking about your book. Tell me, do you write in the mornings or the evenings? He blinked. Pardon? Writers are usually creatures of habit. I suppose you use a typewriter? Number just pen and paper. More organic. Organic, she repeated, smiling. A very modern word. Mr. Renfield's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. You suspect me of something, Miss Marple? Not at all, she said sweetly. But I find it helpful to observe what a person chooses not to say. It tells you everything. Before he could respond, a voice called from behind the lich gate. Inspector Craddock approached, expression unreadable. Mr. Renfield, might I have a word? Renfield gave Miss Marple a tight-lipped smile. Duty calls, he murmured, and followed Craddock down the lane. Miss Marple waited until they were out of earshot, then stepped quietly into the churchyard. She did not go to the graves, but instead to the bench beside the old yew. From there, she could see clearly what Renfield had been watching, the vicarage study, more specifically the second window from the right. Craddock had set up his inquiry there. Files, maps, photographs, all laid out like a chessboard. It was not a scene for tourists or scribblers. It was a scene for men with something to fear. Later that day, Craddock paid Miss Marple a visit. "Do you know what he said when I asked where he was during the moment of the shooting?" the inspector asked, accepting a cup of Darjeeling. Miss Marple shook her head. "Something vague, I expect." Vague would be generous. He said he was walking near the herbaceous border, and that the noise startled him into spilling his lemonade. "Did anyone see him spill it?" "No one. And conveniently the glass had been cleared away before we arrived." Miss Marple stirred her tea. "Have you checked with London yet? About his credentials?" Craddock's expression darkened. "That's the odd thing. There's no record of him at all. No published books, no agent, no travel records. Passport's real enough, but registered in the name of a man who died 5 years ago." Miss Marple's spoon stilled. "And yet he walks free. For now, I've no solid grounds to arrest him, but I have placed him under quiet surveillance." "Then I hope your surveillance officer can knit," said Miss Marple, rising, "because I suspect Mr. Renfield is about to drop another stitch." That evening, Miss Marple took a different route on her walk. She passed the old railway shed, a disused building at the edge of the village, boarded up years ago. It had always looked harmless, but tonight something shimmered in the air around it. She paused at the edge of the hedgerow. Through the slats of broken wood, she could just make out a flicker of light, brief, quick, artificial, like a flash from a signal. The next day she paid a visit to Mr. Adams, the local handyman, and once an army signals officer himself. Over biscuits and weak coffee, she steered the conversation toward radio waves and frequencies. "Oh, you can pick up all sorts these days," he said. "Got a crystal set at home. Heard Russian opera last week. Funny thing, though, someone's been bouncing Morse off the old lines. Thought it was kids at first, but the pattern's too precise." "Morse?" Miss Marple asked, gently. "Yes. Not English either. Letters didn't make sense." "But could you write them down as you heard them?" "Suppose I could," said Mr. Adams. "Why?" "Oh, I do love a puzzle," she said. By the following afternoon, Miss Marple had what she needed: a scrap of paper, lines of Morse, and a memory of Eliza Burnhope's code-breaking days. She spent an hour cross-checking the letters, and what she saw chilled her. SMK-PCK-NR-R-46 Street, Michael, package, November, rain, 1946. A signal was being sent again, but why now and to whom? Back in her cottage, she stared at the fire, the final threads knitting together in her mind. She saw it clearly now. Eliza had intercepted something. Renfield had come to retrieve it, and someone else, someone watching from the shadows, had started the whole clock ticking again. Chapter 5. The Code in the Teacup. The following morning was unusually still in St. Mary Mead. No birdsong, no clatter of milk bottles. Even the church bells seemed to chime more cautiously, as though wary of waking something best left undisturbed. Miss Marple sat at her breakfast table, the Morse transcription from Mr. Adams neatly folded beside her toast and marmalade. Her eyes were drawn, again and again, to the 4 letters at the centre of it all. PCK-NR-R-46. Package. November, rain, 1946. The same elements from Eliza's final message, which meant someone, perhaps many someones, had been waiting nearly 3 decades for a ghost from the past to resurface. And now it had. In a murder, a signal, and a stranger with no past. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, then looked toward the high shelf above her mantel. It held an odd assortment of small gifts and forgotten trinkets. A painted thimble, a tiny wooden donkey from Seville, and, more importantly, a dusty blue and white teacup with a crack down one side. The cup had belonged to Eliza Burnhope. Miss Marple had purchased it with a bundle of odds and ends from a church jumble sale not 2 weeks ago, when Eliza had donated several boxes anonymously. Curious as ever, Miss Marple had gone through them. Most of it had been unremarkable, but this cup had a lid. At the time, she had thought it quaint, perhaps a sugar bowl missing its pair. Now she wasn't so sure. She retrieved the teacup and held it up to the light. The porcelain glimmered faintly, fine and almost translucent. Inside, the base was stained from years of use, but there was something else, faint speckling, almost invisible unless one looked closely. She carried it to the stove and warmed it slightly over the low flame, turning it carefully. And then, like a photograph appearing in developer fluid, a pattern emerged, faint letters, faded numbers, lines running under the glaze, invisible ink. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and tilted the cup. There it was, 3 lines, small and elegant. Avery lives, Vienna, 3rd vault. She exhaled slowly. Leonard Avery was alive. Number, not necessarily. It could mean the story of his death was fabricated, or that his death had been faked, or simply that Eliza had once believed it. But more than that, it confirmed something else. Eliza had known. She had discovered something, likely from old papers or some final message, and hidden it inside the most unassuming of objects, a teacup. A domestic artifact that no spy, no soldier, no thief would think to check. Unless, of course, they were looking. And now, Eliza was dead. Miss Marple packed the teacup carefully into a padded envelope and walked it over to Inspector Craddock at the vicarage. He examined it in silence, then raised his eyes. Hidden code in a teacup? Really? People hide things where they think others will not look, said Miss Marple calmly. Men tend to overlook the value of a woman's china cabinet. Craddock gave a low whistle. This confirmed she knew something, perhaps too much. And Renfield? Whether he killed her or is chasing the one who did, I don't yet know, Miss Marple replied, but I believe we've found his reason for coming. Craddock leaned back. This vault in Vienna, could it be? Miss Marple nodded. Avery's archive, or what remains of it. Then someone wants it back, and someone else is willing to kill for it. That afternoon, a peculiar thing happened. Miss Marple received a visitor. He was thin, grey-haired, and wore round spectacles that magnified his pale eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Dean, a cousin of Eliza's, come at last to settle her affairs. But Eliza never spoke of you, Miss Marple said, motioning him to a chair. We lost touch, he replied quickly. Family dispute, unpleasant business, but I was told of her passing and I came. Of course, Miss Marple murmured, watching him closely. He drank his tea without sugar and never once blinked when she mentioned the cup. Then, as if rehearsed, he asked, Did Eliza leave any effects? Perhaps something personal? A keepsake. Miss Marple smiled pleasantly. Only her heart, I'm afraid, and that went with her. He left soon after, but not before casting a lingering glance toward her display shelf where the teacup had once sat. The moment he was gone, she rang Craddock. That man was not Eliza's cousin, she said. He came for the teacup. Craddock swore under his breath. Another one, unless, of course, they were looking. And now Eliza was dead. Miss Marple packed the teacup carefully into a padded envelope and walked it over to Inspector Craddock at the vicarage. He examined it in silence, then raised his eyes. Hidden code in a teacup, really? People hide things where they think others will not look, said Miss Marple calmly. Men tend to overlook the value of a woman's china cabinet. Craddock gave a low whistle. This confirmed she knew something, perhaps too much. And Renfield? Whether he killed her or is chasing the one who did, I don't yet know, Miss Marple replied. But I believe we've found his reason for coming. Craddock leaned back. This vault in Vienna, could it be? Miss Marple nodded. Avery's archive, or what remains of it. Then someone wants it back, and someone else is willing to kill for it. That afternoon, a peculiar thing happened. Miss Marple received a visitor. He was thin, grey-haired, and wore round spectacles that magnified his pale eyes. He introduced himself as Mr. Dean, a cousin of Eliza's, come at last to settle her affairs. But Eliza never spoke of you, Miss Marple said, motioning him to a chair. We lost touch, he replied quickly. Family dispute, unpleasant business, but I was told of her passing and I came. Of course, Miss Marple murmured, watching him closely. He drank his tea without sugar and never once blinked when she mentioned the cup. Then, as if rehearsed, he asked, Did Eliza leave any effects? Perhaps something personal? A keepsake? Miss Marple smiled pleasantly. Only her heart, I'm afraid, and that went with her. He left soon after, but not before casting a lingering glance toward her display shelf, where the teacup had once sat. The moment he was gone, she rang Craddock. That man was not Eliza's cousin, she said. He came for the teacup. Craddock swore under his breath. Another one? Chapter 6. The Visitor in the Night. The rain returned before morning, a thin whispering drizzle that clung to hedges and windows and turned the cobbled lanes of St. Mary Mead slick with silence. Miss Marple rose early. She had barely slept. The torn photograph now rested between the pages of a copy of Great Expectations, pressed flat but not forgotten. Eliza and Captain Avery, a crypt in Vienna, and that troubling message scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. They're not who you think. She had studied the picture with her magnifying glass under the lamplight. There had been a small detail almost missed, a medallion hanging from Avery's neck, just visible under his collar. A cross. Unusual for a man in uniform. Not standard issue, she had thought. At precisely 10 o'clock, Inspector Craddock knocked at her door. He had received her late-night message and arrived with damp hair and muddy boots. She handed him the photo. It was left for me? Quietly, intentionally. The sender did not wish to be seen. Craddock turned it over in his gloved hands. Eliza and Avery, this confirms their link. And the background, Miss Marple said. St. Michael's Crypt, Vienna. Craddock grunted. St. Michael again, it keeps returning like an echo. Miss Marple poured tea and said quietly, I believe we are being watched, Inspector. Craddock leaned in. Do you mean Mr. Renfield? I believe he is a watcher, yes, but there is another. Craddock frowned. The cousin? Number someone else entirely. Someone who delivered this. I didn't hear him approach. He knew the garden. Knew I'd find it. Craddock rubbed his chin. Someone local then? Familiar with you? Miss Marple nodded. But the question is, friend or foe? That afternoon the village was subdued. Word of Eliza's funeral arrangements had begun to circulate, and the villagers responded with gentle nods, polite condolences, and plates of shortbread. No one spoke directly of the murder anymore, but underneath the surface, suspicion crackled like dry grass. Miss Marple paid a visit to the library, where she located an obscure monograph on European religious crypts. There, tucked between illustrations of candlelit corridors and Baroque coffins, she found it, St. Michael's Crypt, Vienna. Once a hiding place during the war, later sealed and forgotten. But it was said that briefly it had been used by Allied agents as a temporary archive in 1946, codebooks, tapes, photographs, and apparently Avery had known it well. She was returning home, her umbrella bobbing slightly in the drizzle, when a voice called her name. Miss Marple! She turned to see Reverend Prowse, breathless and wet, hurrying across the vicarage lawn. "You've had a visitor," he panted. "Asked after you by name, said he was an old friend. Foreign gentleman, had a very peculiar accent." Miss Marple stiffened. "Did he say his name?" "Only that he was passing through and needed a word. I offered tea, of course, but he declined." "Did he leave anything?" The vicar reached into his coat. "Just this." It was a small envelope, inside a single square of paper with 5 typed words. "It's not Renfield alone. No signature. No date." Miss Marple stared at it for a long moment, then folded it carefully and placed it in her handbag. "Thank you, Reverend." That night, as the wind howled and rain slicked the cobblestones, Miss Marple sat beside the fire, knitting untouched in her lap. Her thoughts moved like clockwork. If the message was correct, and Renfield was not alone, then who else had come to St. Mary Mead? A knock at the door startled her. She checked the time. midnight. The knock came again, softer now. She stood and crossed to the hall, her footsteps nearly silent on the rug. "Who is it?" she called through the door. A pause. Then a voice, low, accented, urgent. "Miss Marple, it's about Leonard Avery." She opened the door a cautious inch, the chain still fastened. A man stood on the step, rain-soaked and pale. He wore a trench coat, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "I haven't much time," he said, "but you're the only one who might listen." Miss Marple opened the door a fraction more. "Who are you?" "My name is Carl Wiseman. I worked with Avery in 1946. I was supposed to be dead." She blinked. "Supposed to be?" "They tried to silence us, bury everything, but Eliza remembered. She kept it alive, until now." He pulled a small object from his coat, a metal key with a worn tag. "St. Michael's, the 3rd vault. The package is real." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And Mr. Renfield?" "He's not just after the package, he's after everyone who ever knew what was inside it." Miss Marple felt a cold shiver run up her spine. "Then why come to me?" "Because you're the only one in this village not pretending." He turned, already retreating into the night. "Wait," she called. "What's in the package?" He stopped at the garden gate. "Proof of betrayal." Then he was gone. The next morning, Renfield was gone too. His room at the Thatcher's Arms lay empty. No luggage, no notebook, just a silver cufflink on the dresser shaped like a falcon. Military issue, foreign. But Miss Marple wasn't fooled. He was still in the village, just not in plain sight. And now she had a key, the code, the photo, the message, the teacup, the key. It was coming together now, piece by piece. And she would be ready. Chapter 7. Piecing the pattern. The key rested in the palm of Miss Marple's hand like a fragment of the past refusing to be buried. It was small, unadorned, and cold. Cold like the facts that had begun to rise steadily from the soil of St. Mary Mead. Outside, the rain had stopped. A grey morning unfolded over the village, muted and expectant, like a theatre just before the curtain rose. She sat by the window, the key on the table beside her tea, and considered everything that had happened in the past week. A stranger had arrived with a polished accent and no past. A woman who once held secrets had died suddenly in an orchard. A coded message had been hidden in a teacup. A photograph had surfaced, one that proved Leonard Avery, the ghost of a war gone cold, had perhaps not been a ghost at all. And then there was the late-night visitor, Carl Wiseman, with the truth trembling behind his rain-slick voice. "The package is real. Proof of betrayal." Miss Marple was no stranger to betrayal. She had seen it bloom behind the kindest smiles and lurk beneath the neatest rose bushes. But this was something larger, older. It didn't smell of greed or jealousy, but of nations and oaths and the awful quiet that follows after wartime ends, and everyone pretends nothing lingers in the cracks. She went to see Inspector Craddock. He listened as she laid out the sequence, the code, the photograph, the key, the messages. At the mention of Wiseman, his eyes sharpened. "I know the name," he said. "One of Avery's colleagues, presumed dead in 1946. His body was never recovered." "Well, it seems he's recovered himself quite nicely," Miss Marple said. "And he's frightened." Craddock sat back. "If Avery is alive, or was until recently, and he hid something in Vienna—" "He may have hidden the truth," she said. "Truths people are still willing to kill for." "Renfield." "I believe he's not just a hunter," Miss Marple said softly. "He's also the hunted, and he's not working alone. There's another." Craddock folded his arms. "Then we need to find both before they find that vault." Miss Marple reached into her handbag and produced the key. "It opens the third vault beneath St. Michael's crypt." Craddock frowned at it. "That's Austrian soil. I'll have to make some rather delicate calls." "Then make them," Miss Marple said firmly, rising. "Because I don't believe Eliza was killed simply to silence her." He looked at her. "No, she said. "I believe she had already passed the secret along, and someone, somewhere, knows it." That evening, as dusk fell across the village and the clouds began to disperse, Miss Marple took a solitary walk to the orchard. She paused by the gnarled tree where Eliza Burnhope had fallen, where the pistol had lain half hidden in grass and shadow. She knelt slowly and examined the ground again. She didn't know what she hoped to find, but she trusted in quiet, in returning, in looking again where others had stopped. And then she saw it, something small and metallic wedged between two roots. She eased it out carefully. A button, military style, black enamel, a small engraving, SWR. She turned it over. On the back, a faint maker's mark, Würzburg, 1943. Miss Marple stood slowly. The orchard was silent. The next day, a telegram arrived for Craddock. He shared it with Miss Marple at once. To Detective Inspector Craddock, Re, St. Michael's Vaults, Vienna, confirmed entry under name Avery, L. Contents, sealed under Diplomatic Archive. Entry 2 days ago by man using credentials of foreign embassy, false ID. Miss Marple tapped the telegram gently. Then someone has already retrieved the package. Or thinks they have, Craddock said grimly. Miss Marple gave a faint smile. Then we shall give them reason to be very nervous. She returned to the library that afternoon and asked for access to the parish records, not birth or death, but marriage. And there she found it. Wiseman, Karl, married 1947 in Vienna to Hedwig Avery, sister. Miss Marple sat back. Not a colleague, family. That's why he came to me. That's why he knew whom to trust. Back at her cottage, she found a visitor waiting on her garden path. It was Renfield. But he no longer wore the tweed coat or the polished smile. His tie was gone and his face was drawn. A bruise darkened the side of his jaw. "You shouldn't be here," Miss Marple said calmly. "I don't have much time," he said. "They know. They know I've failed." She said nothing. Renfield's voice dropped. "They're going to leave the country tonight. The one behind it all. He has the package." "Then why come to me?" He pulled something from his pocket. A second photograph. This one showed a familiar face, the man who had posed as Eliza's cousin. "You said it yourself," Renfield whispered. "They're not who you think. This man? He was with Avery in Vienna. He betrayed him. Now he's back to erase the rest." Miss Marple looked at the photograph. She already knew the face, the faint scar near the temple, the habit of blinking when questioned. She nodded slowly. "I'll take care of it." Renfield gave her one last look, something like guilt flickering behind his exhaustion, then vanished into the trees. That evening, Miss Marple laid it all before Craddock: the button, the telegram, the marriage record, the second photograph, the names. "Set a trap," she said. "Make it quiet, but make it final." Craddock nodded. "What should I call the operation?" Miss Marple picked up her teacup, smiling softly. "Call it November Rain." Chapter 8. The Final Needle. The plan was laid as delicately as lace. Inspector Craddock and his men took up their positions at dawn, scattered in plain clothes across St. Mary Mead. One posed as a gardener, another as a milk delivery man. A third sat on the bench outside the post office reading a newspaper upside down. Miss Marple watched it all from her parlour window, her knitting once again in her lap, but the needles unmoving. The quiet of the morning belied the trap, tightening just out of sight. The target, Mr. Dean, the so-called cousin of Eliza Burnhope, now identified as Dietrich Keller, a former intelligence officer turned freelance operative. The man had surfaced in multiple Cold War files and had once worked under the alias Würzburg Jack, a detail Miss Marple had unearthed from a wartime radio archive the day before. He had killed Eliza, Miss Marple was certain, not out of impulse, but calculation. She had decoded something he needed. She had outlived her usefulness. And now Keller was planning to disappear again, vanish across the channel with the stolen contents of the St. Michael's vault in Vienna. But this time Miss Marple would stop him. Just past 9, Keller appeared. He walked down the lane in a dark coat and gloves, carrying what appeared to be a doctor's bag. He looked utterly unremarkable until you noticed how his eyes moved, scanning corners, checking windows, counting steps. He made for the edge of the village, where a car waited, a black Morris Minor, no number plates. Miss Marple stepped out of her cottage just as he passed her gate. "Oh, Mr. Dean," she called pleasantly. He paused, only a flicker of hesitation, then turned with a tight smile. "Miss Marple, good morning." "I do hope I'm not detaining you," she said sweetly, "but I came across something of Eliza's, a silly thing, really. I thought you might want it for sentimental reasons." He hesitated again, wary now. She held out a small package, wrapped in brown paper, light as air. He took it slowly. "Thank you." "She always said truth was a fragile thing," Miss Marple said, "like porcelain." Keller looked at her sharply. "Did she?" "Oh, yes," Miss Marple said, her expression unchanged. "And she knew you'd come for it. That's why she hid it in something no man would understand. A teacup." Keller's fingers tightened on the package. From behind him, 2 plainclothes officers moved in. He swung suddenly, dropping the parcel, and bolted toward the car. But Craddock stepped out from the hedgerow with a pistol drawn. "No further," he said, coolly. Keller froze. Then, quietly, almost regretfully, he raised his hands. In the station, hours later, Craddock laid it all out on the table. Keller had posed as a cousin, eliminated Eliza Burnhope, and retrieved the key to the 3rd vault in Vienna. But he hadn't been the only one hunting the truth. Renfield, real name Jonathan Lyman, was a government counterintelligence agent, sent not to steal the package but to prevent its theft. He had failed to reach Eliza in time. The guilt of her death had driven him to act alone. He was rogue, Craddock explained. But he meant well, tried to protect what he could. "And the package?" Miss Marple asked. Craddock opened the sealed case. Inside, photographs, coded transcripts, letters, proof that during the final months of the war, a senior Allied official had exchanged protected identities British assets in Austria for safe passage of certain defectors. Leonard Avery had discovered the betrayal. He and Karl Weissman had sealed the documents away beneath the crypt in Vienna. Avery had faked his death to protect the vault. Weissman had gone underground. Eliza Burnhope had been entrusted with the final link. "Proof of betrayal," Miss Marple whispered. Craddock nodded. "The kind that could have ruined lives, perhaps even started new conflicts, had it come out then." Miss Marple sat back, hands folded neatly. "It's strange," she said softly. "All these years and the war never really ended for some people. It just changed shape." 2 days later, the village returned to its rhythm. The vicar's dog barked at the post again. Mrs. Goodbody scolded her son for tracking mud through the kitchen. The greengrocer reopened with a special on carrots. Eliza Burnhope was laid to rest beneath a yew tree in the parish cemetery. The rain held off. Miss Marple placed a single white rose on the coffin and whispered something no one else could hear. She returned home alone. But as she opened the door to her cottage, she found a small envelope on the threshold. No handwriting, no postage. Inside, a single item, the original cufflink she had found in Renfield's room. And a note you saw through everyone, even me. "But not all spies are villains. Thank you for saving more than you know." J.L., Miss Marple, smiled faintly. She tucked the cufflink away in a drawer beside the cracked teacup and sat down to her knitting. Her needles moved at last, steady and sure. Outside, the church bell rang once. The village of St. Mary Mead breathed easily again, but behind one window a quiet woman with snow-white hair and sharp eyes kept watch still, for the truth, the lie, and the fine thread between them.